shower or thunderstorm. Wind gusts of up to 40 miles an hour. Highs today in the mid-60s. Clear tonight, a low in the mid-40s. Sunshine back tomorrow with a high in the upper 60s. WIBX News Time 8:27. Joined on First Look this morning by Congressman Michael Arcuri. We're talking about some election issues. You mentioned your teamwork plan, and we received, after we mentioned on the show yesterday that you would be joining us, we received 2 emails, in fact, about concerns with high-speed rail. The concerns expressed were if these rails run parallel to current railroad tracks, what does that do to the rural roads that they run over?
Great question. Excellent. Actually, and there's 2 really good points about that, Jeff. One is that part of the way they have to design that is that they have to make it special. That's part of the cost, so that it doesn't hurt the roads. It'll be no different on the roads than the ordinary track is. I mean, it's no different whatsoever.
Kind of sunken into the...
it would just be, that's the cost in creating the overpass. But why it's more affordable in New York is because we already have the bed there. Like if you look at the railroad tracks, the 2 railroad tracks that run along the Barge Canal, there's a 3rd bed right next to it because there used to be actually 4 tracks, so they will run it right on that. So there will be no damage to the rural roads. But let me say this, the benefit to the rural roads is enormous, and it's because of this. We talk about this all the time. I'm on the transportation and on the rail subcommittee, is that what we will be doing is taking more heavy trucks off the local roads. And that's what I hear the biggest complaint from localities, especially down in the Finger Lakes region. They say, hey, what's happening is trucks are coming up, garbage trucks from New York City, and they're getting off of the toll roads, getting on local roads, and they're damaging our local roads. And when they go damage the local roads, that's a cost to the local governments. So by creating a better ability to ship heavy goods by rail, we're actually helping the roads stay in better repair. So, and we keep talking about high-speed rail. That's really not the best way to describe it. It's really better, it's more speed rail. It's getting the trains to go, people think of high-speed rail being 200 miles an hour, yes. But the rail that we're working on in New York will be 100 to 150 miles an hour. Right now, the trains in most areas along the New York corridor, what we call the Empire Corridor, go about 55, 60 miles an hour. Those trains can do 95 miles an hour now without anything, just by improving the rail. So that's really what we're talking about.
All right. We do have a caller on the line we'd like to get to. This is, I believe, Carl in Rome. Good morning, Carl.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Good morning, Carl.
Good morning. Congressman Arcuri, you voted yes for what ended up being a nearly $800 billion stimulus bill that was loaded with what appeared to be wasted pork. Did you vote knowing that it had this needless pork in it, or were you one of the members of Congress that didn't take the time to read the bill? Respectfully.
Oh, respectfully. No, that's a great question. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that the bill had. Like, the VA Center out in Rome. We spent $1 million on fixing the VA Center and making it better in Rome. That's an incredible help to the people in Rome, especially the veterans. Not just in Rome, but the veterans in Utica and the veterans in Herkimer. And it not only did that, but it put local people to work in our area. That was very important. There were a lot of roads that needed to be paved in Rome that, frankly, the city of Rome didn't have the money to do, the state didn't have the money to do, so they were done through the stimulus bill. There's a facility, a healthcare facility on Oneida Street in Utica. Again, stimulus money went to that. These things absolutely there was a tough decision to make, and it's pretty easy to sit there after the fact and say, maybe we should have, maybe we shouldn't have, but, in tough times you have to make decisive decisions, and that was one of those decisions. And as a result of the stimulus bill, although some people, and aren't happy to hear it, the stimulus bill held employment, kept employment from falling to 20%. Additionally, firefighters in Rome, policemen in Utica, and teachers throughout Oneida County kept their job as a result of that. And I think most importantly, and this is the point I like to make, and County Executive Pacenti, who incidentally is Republican, says this all the time, but for the FMAT money that they received, that Oneida County received, and I've heard the same thing from Jim Wallace in Herkimer County. But for that, they would have had to dramatically raise property taxes in Oneida and Herkimer County because that money was critical. Now, think about how tough that would have been if local property taxes were raised. So, I read the bill. I think that the bill worked. It did what it was supposed to do. It kept employment from falling to 20%, and it put people to work, and it did some great things, especially when I think of that veterans facility and I hear how many people use it and are happy with it. I think it was the right decision to make.
Well, I'd like to say that there are a lot of people like Carl in Rome who feel that your vote for the stimulus bill was a bad idea or a wrong move. Why do you think there's still this sentiment out there, considering how much good the stimulus bill has done? Do you think Democrats are doing enough to brag about what they've done, all the success they've had? I mean, is the message going out enough? I mean, why do you think you're still getting people like Carl saying, I think this might have been, a wrong vote?
Well, I think one of the things, Jeanette, is that there's so much partisanship. I mean, the difficulty is this, you have people, like Sherry Bowler, who used to reach across the aisle. We're not seeing as much of that. I reach across the aisle. I'm a blue dog Democrat. I'm a more moderate Democrat. We try to work, but we're not seeing a lot of that cooperation. So we're seeing people saying, turning bills like the stimulus bill that I think were necessary into political, tools, wedges, if you will, to try to really, divide the American people. I think one of the differences between the Depression in 1929 and what we recently saw is we took action quickly this time by passing the stimulus bill, the recovery bill. In 29, they didn't do that. Hoover didn't do that, and we saw unemployment fall to 25%. So I think unfortunately, both sides are using much of what happens as, political tools to really drive a wedge in between Americans, and I think that's what has people so frustrated, and that's what I'm working to try to prevent. That's why you don't hear me talking about Democrats, Republicans. I talk about what I voted for, what I didn't vote for, and what I think my vision and ideas are for the future. And again, there's no such thing as a Democratic or Republican idea. There's only ideas that work or don't work.
Let me ask you this. Despite successes in the stimulus bill, and whether you blame, not you, but people blame the Obama administration or they want to blame Bush, the country faces an enormous amount of debt. Going forward, how do we get out of that debt?
Great question. A couple of things. I was co-sponsor of a bill called, we call it PAYGO, but it's pay as you go. And it's something that we had during the Clinton administration, and that's how we balanced the budget. And that's very simple. It's what we all do at home. You don't spend it if you don't have it. So in other words, you don't borrow for it. Either you have to raise taxes, which we're not going to do, or you have to cut another program if you want to increase spending. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I am co-sponsor of legislation that will do a straight across the board 2% cut. I think if we cut 2 to 3% off of every program, because it's very difficult to say that's a bad program, this is a bad program, so let's cut straight across the board, and I think that would be one of the very good ways of doing it. Now, let me take that one step further. I introduced a bill, and I think this is the best way to keep taxes down. This is the best way to cut spending. I introduced a bill called the Congressional Belt-Tightening Act, and what that does is that would cut salaries of congressmen by 5% for the next 2 years, and also cut our own budgets by 5%. And the reason I think that's critically important is then we have cut our own budgets and our own salaries by 5%. Then we turn around and say to every other, program that's out there, except defense and homeland security, is let's cut 2 to 3% from your budget. And I've done this when people have come into my office and said to me, Congressman, you can't, will you support an increase for our program? And I say, no, I won't, and then I say, but I have cut my own budget. So I will do that next year, but I've already done it. So last year I said to my staff, I want you to cut 5% from our budget. And my chief of staff said what most chief of staff say, boss, we can't do that. I said, yes, we can. So-and-so, somebody retired. Let's not fill that vacancy right away. Let's wait a month or two. Instead of ordering 3 computers, let's order 1 computer, that kind of thing. We didn't cut 5%, we cut 8%. And we turned back to the federal government last year $120,000. And this year we're on track to turn back about $180,000. those just by making cuts. So it's possible to do. We'll do it next. We'll do it this year, and we'll do it again next year, and I'll cut my own salary by 5% next year. My wife isn't real happy with that. I think it's the kind of example that we need to set. I mean, that's what Americans, I think, are so upset about, is the fact that it's got to be not just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk as well. And that's why I think my bill is important to the across-the-board cut, because then we can say to other groups, look, we've cut ourselves 5%. We can cut your program by 2% or 3%.
We've got several callers on the line with questions for Congressman Michael Arcuri. We will start with Rich. Good morning, Rich.